도마들이야. 사람균이 신신한 게 러주계의 신의 남바당 대신도 준바도 주만 남바.
First of all, I would like to offer my greetings to everyone listening over the internet, the lamas, the chulkus, the geshes, all of the monks and nuns, and all of my Dharma friends.
어느 모두인이 가수로다 그도 담배기 어느 시순이 봐 야나
So today, I will continue speaking about the second of the two accounts, the account taught in the great commentary on 100,000 Prajnaparamita that was attributed to Nagarjuna. So today I will begin speaking about Ananda's 6 offenses. This is the point we have come to this today.
So today,
generally, regarding Ananda's various offenses, there are many different accounts of them in the different sutras and treatises, and there are primarily 10 different accounts. Now, what these are, first, according to the first is the 5 offenses, according to the Theravada Kantaka. The Mahasangika 5-part Vinaya says that Ananda had 6 offenses. The Sarvastivada 10 recitations of the Vinaya say that Ananda had 6 offenses. According to the Mahasangika Vinaya, he had 7 offenses. According to the finer points of discipline of the Mula Sarvastivada school, he had 8 offenses. And then according to the great commentary on the 100,000, which we are speaking about now, he had 6 offenses. Now, this is primarily according to the Sarvastivada account, not the Mula Sarvastivada account, but the Sarvastivada account. Now, other than the order being different, these are basically the same as the offenses in the great commentary on the 100,000. Then there are the 7 offenses according to a Vinaya commentary called the Vinaya Matrika. So there are 7 offenses listed there. And there's the Sutra of the Buddha's Mahaparinirvana, and that lists 7 offenses. The 10th is the Sutras of Kashyapa compiling the words of the Buddha. And this says that there are 9 offenses. And these are very similar to the offenses listed in our Mula Sarvastivada finer points of discipline. So basically, there are people whose schools that had 5 offenses, or 6 offenses, 7 offenses, 8 offenses, 9 offenses, or 9 offenses. And so there are these various different positions. Now, those that say that he has 6 offenses also have slightly different texts and different orders.
대바 소수기 뒤에 나눠다 다리 창으로 니 나눠려야 까대니 시주기 가서 다시 주민도 주요하듯이 창으로 주민나 고야디 도시 뒤주게 등민도라데.
No, I wanted to showing all of these 10 different positions in 10 different positions in a table would be difficult to show. But so I decided that here I would make a table of the different schools' positions of Ananda's offenses, and I'd show them to you. And so here, if you look at this, on the first line is the Vinaya text of each of the different schools. It's showing which of the schools the position comes from. The second line shows who is the accuser, the person who questions Ananda about his faults. Now, most of them say that it's Mahakashyapa who said the false, but some of them say that it was Upali who made the questions. And some say that it was the elder bhikshus who asked. And so there are differences in who it is who asks about the Buddha going forth. And then next is there are the differences in the way the different offenses are listed. And whether talking the Mahasaka or the Dhammaguptaka, Savastavada Vinaya, or the Theravada Vinaya, they describe each of the offenses slightly different, and I don't need to list each of them. And they don't all fit on a single page, so I've divided them onto two. So this is how it is.
And
now in the canon, there are different presentations of the number of offenses Ananda had, and the highest number of Ananda's offenses is 9, and the lowest is the 4. Now, how many of them are common to all of them? Well, there are only 4 that are only common to all of them, and these 4 are that is first not asking the Buddha about the minor precepts, what the minor precepts are. The second is about requesting the Buddha for women to go forth, saying that that was not okay. And the third is not supplicating the Buddha to pass into nirvana. And so the fourth is that the Buddha asked Ananda to give him the water, but he didn't do it. So this is but in the finer points of Discipline of the Mula Sarvastavada, it says he offered dirty water. That's a little different than the other schools, but most of them say that when the Buddha asked for water, he didn't offer the water. So of the 10 different accusations that were levied against Ananda, and according to the different schools, there are these 4 that are common to all. So next, what I would like to speak about is our main topic at this point, the presentation according to the great commentary on the 100,000. So I'll explain what offenses Mahakashyapa accused Ananda of according to that commentary. And so here, Mahakashyapa said, you have made offenses. And the first is that first the Buddha did not wish for women to go forth. The Buddha initially did not wish to allow women to go forth. But you constantly requested to him, and because of that, like you were too insistent, he's saying, only then did the Buddha allow women to go forth. And because he accepted that, then the Buddha's true Dharma was shortened by 500 years. So that is an offense of yours. This is something that you did that was not all right. That's what Mahakashyapa said. And then in response, what Ananda said was, is that the reason why I asked the Buddha to allow women to go forth and was because I felt such tremendous compassion for Gautama and Prajapati. And so I felt too much compassion. Because of that, I made the request. And another reason for that is that in addition, all of the Buddhas of the 3 times have the 4-field commentary. As I've explained before, the 4-field commentaries are the bhikshus, bhikshunis, the male lay practitioners, and the female lay practitioners. And so there's a section of the Buddha's monastic followers and the lay followers. So all the Buddhas of the 3 times have 4 types of students, and so there's no reason for our teacher not to have 4 groups of students, and so that is why he made the request. So here I've made some drawings about this. So this is the drawing. So this is Mahakashyap saying, you have made the Buddha allow women to go forth, and because of that, the teachings would last 500 years or less, and so you're the one who's making the Buddha does it. And so the answer is, as I've explained it, so that's the response that Anta had. That's the first fault. Now, the second fault was, when the Buddha was close to passing away, when he was almost about to Buddha, he went to Kushinagar. And he was near that. And at that point, the Buddha got sick. And when he got sick, he had his upper robe. We usually call it the Dharma robe, but it's the Chugo, the Dharma. But he folded it in four, and then he lay on that. And at that point, the Buddha said to you, please bring me water, and you didn't give him water. And because you were an offense, you're the attendant of the Buddha, this is an offense. This is not okay, so it's an offense. So this is what Mahakashyapa said. And the explanation Ananda gave is that at that time, there were 500 carts that had just crossed the river. So, the cart means in the front, there was a horse, in the back, there was a cart pulling the cart, and they're going through the water. This is what we mean by the carts and the horse-pulled carts. So they were crossing the river, and so the water was really dirty. It was like all filled with silt. It was dirty. And so it wouldn't have been right for me to take such dirty water and give it to the Buddha. And then Mahakashyapa said to that, even if the water was dirty, he said, you should know difference. Because the Buddha has the miraculous power to make even an ocean's worth of dirty water clean. So the Buddha has such miraculous powers. Why didn't you offer water? So this isn't all right for you. Oh, that was a fault. And so you have to confess your offenses and faults. He said, bring water, and then you didn't fetch water. And so that's an offense. That's the second offense. Now, what was the third fault? That was that in the past, what the Buddha said to you was, if there are individuals who have practiced the 4 feet of miracles, that is, if they achieve these 4 feet of miracles, then they can extend their life to last an eon, or to at least close to an eon. So they'll be able to listen. They gain the power to live almost that long. And the Buddha has practiced the 4 and achieved the 4 feet of the miracles, and so he could have extended his life to an eon, or even close to that. He said that to you, right? But at that time, you didn't make any response. The Buddha said this 3 times, and you said nothing at all. So at that time, you should have said to the Buddha, the Buddha has achieved the 4 feet of miracles, and so it would have been proper for you to remain for an eon or for close to an eon. So please remain that long. You should have made that request, but you didn't do that. And because of that fault, the Buddha passed into nirvana so early. It's because of you who made the Buddha pass in the Buddha. Everything wrong that happened because of you, he's saying. So this is your offense. This is what Mahakashyapa said. Then Ananda gave a response to that, and he said, so at that time, the Buddha said this, but the Maras impeded me. They kind of obscured my mind, and I wasn't able to say anything. But it is not that I harbored an ill intention. It didn't respond to the Buddha. It's like I had no control. I was under the control of the Maras, and I was unable to ask the Buddha, because at that point he was not an arhat. If you're an arhat, the Maras can't impede you. But because he had not achieved arhatship, the Maras got in his way, and he wasn't able to ask anything of the Buddha.
다들이 디제래야 의순 가르송선 다 교랑 그
Then another
상기
thing that Mahakashapa said is that, the Buddha has the Buddha's outer robe, the Sangati or outer robe. And it says, it's not clear that it says sort of, here it says like it's folding it, but in basic it says, when you were being an attendant, you stepped on the Buddha's outer robe. You pressed it down to your feet. You stepped on this really sacred robe of the Buddha. This is terrible of you to do this, and that was not right of you. So that's an offense, he said. So then Ananda gave the explanation that at that point there was like a great wind that had sprung up, and there was no one else around him to help hold on to the robe. It was being pushed by the robe, and so the outer robe then slipped under his foot. It's not like I lacked respect and then intentionally stepped on the Buddha's robes. That's how he explained it. Now, the fifth is that so there's the fine there's the fine mark of the Buddha's genitals being hidden in a sheath. To say this in colloquial terms, the fact of that he allowed women to see the Buddha's genitals. And this is a shameless way of your acting. This is a really incredibly shameful way of you acting. And the way Ananda explained it is at that time, I thought that if that time the Buddhists were able to see these fine marks of the Buddha, they would gain the wish to gain a male body, and then to develop the wish to achieve the fine marks of a Buddha. And so for that reason, I showed that to the women, it wasn't that I did something out of being shameless and that transgressed the precepts. And so this is the fifth of the offense. Now, it says that there are 6 offenses, but so it does say that there are 6 offenses, but it's not listed in the Great Commentary, the 100,000. Perhaps a scribe in the old time probably omitted it. I'm not sure what the problem is, but the 6th offense is not directly shown. But some scholars do say that the 6th offense was not asking about the minor precepts. And that's what they said it's about, and I think it must have been that. Because his not asking about which precepts are minor are ones that are common to all the schools, as I showed before. So it is not. So it says in the Great Commentary, the 100,000, that there are 6 faults, 6 offenses, but only 5 are written in the text. So I think it was inadvertently admitted by a scribe. And so I think that the 6th offense must be not asking about the minor offenses. And so, taking that as my hypothesis, I have saying as the 6th offense, what Mahakashapa said is that when the Buddha was passing into nirvana, the Buddha said that that the minor offenses could be relaxed. This is what the Buddha said. But at that time, you didn't ask what the minor or unimportant offenses were. You did not ask the Buddha to clarify which ones they were. And so because of that, you just made it all really complicated. And so this is a big offense of yours. And so what Ananda said, or is that at that point, I didn't intentionally not ask. I just forgot to ask, he says. Now, some texts say what it says is that at that point, the Buddha was ill, and he thought that it wouldn't be good to bother the Buddha or disturb his mind, and so he didn't ask. In any case, he did not ask about what the minor precepts are. In any case, Mahakashapa listed the 6 offenses of Ananda and said that you needed to go to the Sangha and confess them. And when Mahakashyapa said this, then Ananda did as Mahakashyapa said. He said, just as he said. And he said, I'll do as you advise and make the confess. And then he knelt down with his right foot on the ground. He draped his robe over one shoulder, removed his shoes, and then confessed the 6 offenses among the whole Sangha. Now, after he'd done so, and again, so Mahakashyapa didn't let Ananda off then. And so in the middle of where the entire Sangha was gathered, he took Mahakashyapa by the hand and dragged him outside, or pulled him outside. And he pulled him out of the building where the Kashyapa was. And he said, you are not allowed to return here until you have exhausted all the defilements. And come back when you have exhausted all the defilements. Until you have exhausted all the defilements, you are not allowed, and you cannot come. And he kicked him out, and he closed the door behind him. And so basically, he kicked Ananda out of the place where the Ananda was. He basically expelled him from there. Now, at that time, kicking someone out or expelling a member was not easy. If someone had a defeat, now the defeats, if there's a defeat, and these are the major precepts of the bhikshus, then you were expelled. Otherwise, if you had another offense, then there's no question of being offended. Now, Ananda didn't have such great offenses. If you look at them, they don't seem like they're that incredible offenses. But he blamed him for them and expelled Ananda and kicked him out of the building. So that was the topic of the 6 offenses of Ananda.
Oh, yeah. So
then after the 6 offenses of Ananda, the next one is looking for other masters. When we say looking for other masters, what we mean here is that at that point, the Arhatas were having a discussion. Ananda had been kicked out, and they were having this discussion among the Arhats. And basically, they were asking, we need someone who's able to compile the basket of the Vinaya. So who's able to compile the words of the Buddha? And when they were discussing this, then the elder Aniruddha said, the Buddha's student Shariputra was like a second Buddha. So at that time, someone who everyone respected. But he's passed away. But he did have a really good student, and a great student, and that student's name was Gavampati. So Gavampati was his name. He was named Gavampati, and he's really gentle in character. He's peaceful and subdued. And he always stays in solitude in places where there isn't anyone else. And he remains with his mind remaining in peace. He's really learned in the Vinaya. He's presently in the Shirishatri Park in the realms of the gods. So there's this park in the realms of the gods. That's where he was. So it'd be good for us to send a messenger to invite him. And so this is the suggestion that the elder Noble Aniruddha made. So before I speak about how Gavampati was summoned, I thought I first should give you kind of an introduction to who Gavampati is. Now, according to the Tibetan translation of the Mula Sarvastivada Finer Points of Discipline, in Shravasti, there was a Brahmin who, one day he got a bull. So he got a bull. So this is the male. And then later after he got, a cow. So he got a female. And then he got another bull. And then he got another bull. And sort of like this, like he began a herd. So it was like having a herd. And when he got the herd, and the Brahman thought to himself that the bull that he got very first was like, it was really auspicious that he got it. Because of that, that he ended up with a herd of cattle. And so he set that bull that he got first so that it could just go wherever it pleased. He set it free. And once he did that, then that bull lived on its own independently, and then eventually it grew old. So one day I went down to a riverside to drink the water, and at that time, its legs got into the mud. And when his legs got in the mud, then because it's old, he was unable to free himself from the mud. Now at that time, the noble Shariputra was going by on the road by that very place, and it's at that same time. And he looked down, he wondered whether that bull had any roots of virtue. And thinking about that, he saw that the bull did have some roots of virtue. And then I wonder that what individual might be able to awaken his roots of virtue. And he saw that it depended on him, Shariputra, to awaken the bull's roots of virtue. So he immediately went down and to the bull, and he pulled the bull out of the mud. And then he wiped the bull's body down with his hands. And as he was doing so, he said, all composites are impermanent, all phenomena are selfless, and nirvana is peace. So basically, he spoke these 3 lines of Dharma. And after he said those 3 lines of Dharma, what he said to the Vedas is, so you should have faith in me. You should like me, have faith in me. If you like me and have faith in me, then you may be freed from birth and the ambulance, and you can achieve the result of being free from desire. So Shariputra said this, and then he left. And after that, that bull he eventually passed away. When he died, then he felt like or faith in Shariputra. So he had like a sincere or faithful feeling and passed away. And passed away with that feeling, that sincere faith in his mind. Now, after the bull had passed away, it was reborn in the household of a Brahmin in Shravasti. So he was born as a son in that Brahmin's household. But when he was born, he had come a rather bovine appearance. He looked like a bull. And so for that reason, he was called Gavampati, or the master of oxen. Because he looked like an ox, he was called the master of oxen, or Gavampati. So Shariputra then began to wonder what had happened to that bull. And when he sat in samadhi and looked, he saw that the bull had passed away. And after that bull had passed away, he began to think, where had it been reborn? And then once again, he sat down in meditation. He saw that he'd been reborn in Shravasti in the Brahmin caste. And once Shariputra knew this situation, he kept going over and over again to that Brahmin's house. And he gave the Brahmin and his wife and his whole family the refuge vows and lay preceptors. Now at that time, Gavampati was a very small child. And whenever he saw Shariputra, he was always really happy. And as soon as he was always looking at Shariputra, he was never distracted by anything else, but was only looking at Shariputra, always staring at Shariputra. And so the Brahmin saw this, and he so he asked Shariputra, do you usually have a novice who serves you? And Shariputra, I said, I don't have any novice. He usually comes with me and attends to me. And so then the Brahmin offered him the Gavampati as an attendant to go along with Shariputra. And so Gavampati then went off with Shariputra. He went forth with Shariputra and then eventually achieved full ordination. And so Shariputra gave Gavampati instructions, and Gavampati practiced diligently and eventually achieved arhatship. No, it's really excellent that he had achieved arhatship. That was great, but his face was different. So there's one thing that he says, another way he was different from all people. He said he had two esophaguses, or actually kind of like two stomachs. Like with a cow, when they eat food, first they eat the food, then they swallow it, and it goes into, there's another stomach that people don't have it, they collect it in there. Then at some point they regurgitate it, and then they chew their cud. And so they're sitting chewing their cud, and then they swallow it again. So this is how it works with cows, right? So similarly, Gavampati had these two stomachs like a cow. And when he, after he'd eaten the food, like had this extra stomach in his stomach, then at some point, he would regurgitate it. See, no, he didn't regurgitate it out, but it regurgitated into his mouth, and then he'd have to chew it like chewing his cud. Like as he continued to eat it. So he's kind of like an animal. So this is now, at first, the Buddha had not made a rule about not eating food at inappropriate times. So at first, there was no rule that you couldn't eat food after noon. And so after he'd have food at noon, and then at some point, he would, in the afternoon, he would regurgitate his food and chew his cud and then eat it. But after the Buddha made the rule prohibiting him from eating food after noon, if he were to regurgitate his food and then chew it, chewing his cud or chew this food again, then he'd have that, he would be violating that offense. Because for most people, when they take it before that, they would go into this stomach, they'd have eaten it, but it wasn't like that. Because first you had to have in the first stomach, and you had to regurgitate it, study, chew it, and then then he would swallow it again, and only then could he digest it. So he wasn't like human. So he wasn't able to eat. Because he didn't, his body became really weak. His health deteriorated, and the Buddha saw this and gave an exception for him. Because he was different than other people. He had these two stomachs, or you could say the two esophaguses. And so he made an exception. The Buddha made an exception for him and gave him permission to chew his cud. Likewise, his face was also really kind of scary because it looked like a bull. It's like he had a bull's face. And so whatever he was saying is that. So people would say critically, even frightening people who look at bulls are allowed to go forth. And so you can't say this person can go forth and that can't. So this guy who looks like a bull, he looks like an oxen or a bull. And even those people are allowed to go forth. These are the people that were supposed to make offering. There's such scary-looking people among the people who are supposed to offer them. So many people who've made this criticism. So for this reason, the Buddha said to Gavampati, don't stay in the central region. It's not where there are a lot of people. Instead, go to some remote area where there are fewer people. And so he listened to the Buddha's instructions, and he left the central, and he went to this to the place, Shishi Palace. Now, this is probably some sort of a park in the realms of the gods, because later, when Mahakashapa then called for him, he was at that Shirish park in the realm of the gods. So that's probably what it was. Now, you might wonder what karma it was that he had committed that led to him looking like an ox. Now, this is a really long story, actually, a very story in the distant past. Now, during the time of the Buddha Kashyapa, he went forth. He was a monastic. In this earlier life, he had become a monk under Buddha Kashyapa. And the preceptor who had given him the vows of going forth was an arhat. But he got really old. And he was really weak and really thin and frail. And he really wasn't able to eat on his own. One time, the preceptor had eaten his food. He gave this previous birth of Gavambati to his alms bowl to clean and bring back to him. At that time, the preceptor was still really old, so he was still chewing his food. He could only eat really slowly or not, otherwise he couldn't do it. So he had all the food, he'd finished the food, and he'd given back the alms, and he'd still come back, he's still sitting there chewing. And the preceptor is still chewing away. Oh, and he said that, and he saw this, and he got a little bit angry. He said, "You're eating so slowly, it's like you're eating like an ox. You're like a bull chewing your cud, still chewing like a bull chewing its cud." And because of that offense, then he spent 500 births being reborn as a bull. And then after that, when he was reborn as Gavampati, he had taken a human birth, of course, but his face was shaped like a bull's head. And so he was still shaped like that. So that is the story or the legend of Gavampati. In any case, Aniruddha said, it's good to summon Gavampati because he knows the Vinaya really well. So everyone in the Sangha decided to invite Gavampati. And Mahakashyapa then asked a student, a bhikshu who was a student, can you go as the messenger of the Sangha? And then the bhikshu asked, well, what message would the Sangha like to send? Mahakashyapa said, would like you to go to the Shirisha Park in the realms of the gods, to the Arhat Gavampati. You have to go there, he said. And the bhikshu was just delighted. He said, I'll do as you say. Oh, once I come into the presence of the Arhat Gavampati, what should I say? And Mahakashyapa said, once you've arrived at the Shirishtapa Park in the realms of the gods, then you should tell Gavampati that Mahakashyapa and all the arhats who extinguish the defilements have gathered in Jambudvipa and convincing with a great dharma activity, so please come swiftly. That's what you should say, Kashyapa said. And so that bhikshu prostrated to the Sangha. He circumambulated them 3 times clockwise. Then he flew off into the sky like Garuda. He flew into the sky. And he went to the place where Gavampati was dwelling. And so first he prostrated to Gavampati and said, oh, Gavampati, you are so venerable, you have few desires, and you're very content. You're resting perpetually in jhana. And so the Sangha in Jambudvipa has sent me to see you. And today the Sangha is commencing with a great dharma activity. So you please come, they say. So this is what he said. And when the bhikshu asked this, then the Arhat Gavampati got a little bit suspicious. He's thinking, they don't usually call me like that, so why are they summoning me now? Has there been some sort of a dispute in the business? Is that why you're calling me? Is there a schism in the Sangha? Has the schism have divided in two? That's not why you've come for me. Or are you calling me because the Buddha has passed into parinirvana? At that time, the bhikshu replied, oh, it's as you said. The teacher, the Buddha, has passed into nirvana, he said. Oh. And then Gavampati said, oh, the Buddha's passed into nirvana far too soon. He should have passed away, but he has, and now the eye of the world has been blinded. After the Buddha, the other one who's able to turn the wheel of Dharma, no one is better than Shariputra at turning the wheel of Dharma. So where is he? And the bhikshu said, well, Shariputra has also passed into nirvana. And then Gavampati said, oh, all those great beings are just passing into nirvana, so what can we do? What's the best thing to do? In that case, so where is great Mount Galyana? Where is he now? And he's also passed into nirvana, the bhikshu said. Then Gavampati said, oh, the teachings really are about to disappear. The great beings are departed. And so, we should really have compassion for sentient beings. And he continued speaking. And then eventually Gavampati said, well, where is the elder Ananda? He's asking about Ananda. And then the bhikshu said, well, after the Buddha passed into nirvana, Ananda has been really grieving, and he really feels a lot of sorrow. He's always crying and shedding tears. That's like he's left dumbfounded. He's unable to control himself anymore. Then Gavampati said, well, if Nirvana still hasn't abandoned the afflictions, and if he's still having the sorrow of being separated from the Buddha, he's been so close to him, so he feels the sorrow of parting. Well, anyway, where's the Buddha's son, Rahula, the Buddha's son, right? Because Rahula is the Buddha's son, so what he's probably thinking, well, now the Buddha's passed away, so what is his son Rahula doing? And in response, Bhikshu said, well, Rahula has achieved arhatship, so he's not grieving or feeling any sorrow. But he's just sitting there always pondering how all phenomena are impermanent by nature. Gavampati said, oh, he's abandoned all the desires. It's hard to abandon, so he probably wouldn't grieve. And then he continued to say, my teacher has passed away, so there's no point for me to continue to stay here in the Kshirosagar. My preceptor Shariputra has passed away. My teacher, the Buddha Shakyamuni, has passed away. And so if that's the case, if there's no point for me going down to nirvana, so I will pass into nirvana right here. And as soon as he said this, he immediately entered samadhi, and his body levitated into the sky. And first it radiated many light rays. And then he had many, water and fire coming from his body. And he could reach out and touch the sun and moon with his hands. And he showed so many other different miracles. And then in the very end, this fire came from his heart. And it surrounded his entire, it enveloped his body and burnt it up. Now, at the same time as the fire was burning the water, then 4 streams of water flowed out of his body. And as those streams of water flowed down, they came to where Mahakashyapa was. As the water streams came to Mahakashyapa, and then naturally there came from this water the sounds of these verses, these words. And what this verse says is, I, Gavampati, prostrate with respect to the great elder foremost in the Sangha. I've heard the Buddha has passed, and I shall follow you, just as an elephant calf follows the elephants. Basically saying, I'm going to pass away. I heard the Buddha's pass away, and I'm going to follow him and go pass away, just as an elephant calf will follow after the elephants. And so Gavampati passed away. They weren't able to invite Gavampati. So now we will take the 30-minute intermission.
So now
I've finished discussing searching for other masters, and now we're at the point where we need to speak about Ananda achieving the result. Now, as I said before, the elder Mahakashyapa sent the bhikshu to Gavampati to invite Gavampati, but he didn't come. And not only that, he passed away. And after he passed away, then the bhikshu brought Gavampati's dharma robes and alms bowls to offer to the Sangha and to Mahakashyapa. Now, this is described very clearly in the Mulasavastavada finer points on discipline. In the great commentary on the finer point, on the great commentary on the 100,000, it only says that the bhikshu offered Gavampati's dharma robes and alms bowl to the Sangha. But it's clear in the Mulasavastavada finer points. According to the finer points, it was Purana who was sent to summon Gavampati. And after Gavampati heard that the Buddha had passed into nirvana, what he said to Purana was, please offer my alms bowl and the 3 dharma robes to the Sangha. I'm going to pass into peace, so please ask the Sangha to forgive me. And so then he displayed the miracle of his body bursting into flame and water flowing from it. Then he passed into nirvana. Then Purana took Gavampati's relics and alms bowls and dharma robes, and he returned to Mahakashyapa and the other elders and offered it to them, it says.
Now, during
that time when the Sangha was inviting Gavampati, at that time, Ananda was analyzing the nature of all phenomena, and he sought to become free of all defilements. And he tried very hard to it. And he didn't even sleep much at night. He spent it meditating on dhyana, and he was pacing, doing walking meditation, walking back and forth. And so he was striving very hard to achieve the result. Now, Ananda really had very great prajna, but he was rather weak in having a stable shamatha meditation, so he didn't immediately achieve the result. If his prajna and samadhi had both been very good, he would have achieved the result very quickly. But he had great prajna, but he didn't have much stability during shamatha. He didn't have much time to practice jhana meditation when he was serving the Buddha. And he was always in the midst of many different diversions and distractions, and this gave him some difficulties. And so on that night, he worked hard, he tried hard at jhana meditation and so forth until midnight, and then after midnight, Ananda got really tired and exhausted, and he thought that he should take some rest. And he was about to lie down. Just before his head was about to touch the pillow, and he became free of obscurations and gained realizations. When he gained the realization, it's like at night when a bolt of lightning flashes, and when the flash is flashing, you can see everything around you clearly. The same way, in an instant, he achieved the noble state and manifested the path. And then Ananda entered the Vajra-like samadhi, crushed the mountains of the afflictions, he achieved the 3 knowledges, the 6 clairvoyances, the quality of liberation, and the powerful state of arhatship. And so that night that he achieved the state, that very night, he didn't wait till the morning. That very night, he went to the building where the Sangha was staying. There's a Sangha where they're staying, and he got there. He went to the door, and he knocked on the door, and at the same time, he called Mahakashyapa by name. He said, "Kashyapa, Mahakashyapa," and he was knocking on the door. Mahakashyapa was wondering, who's knocking at the door? And he said, "Oh, it's me, Ananda." And so Mahakashyapa said, "Why are you coming here?" And so Ananda said, "So this evening, this night, I've achieved the undefiled. I've achieved the state of arhatship," he said. So the other day, Mahakashapa said, "Don't come back till you've achieved the previous day, Mahakashapa said, you can't come back until you achieve Arhatship." And then that same night he comes back. And Mahakashapa said, "Well, I'm not going to open the door for you. You say you say you've achieved the state of Arhatship. So that there's a keyhole in the door, right? So you have to come through there. You have miraculous powers." And Ananda said, "It's okay. Fine, I'll do it." And he did a Miskila and he went through that keyhole, that small hole of the keyhole, and he went in through that. And he went through there. And then he prostrated to Mahakashapa. And Ananda said, "As a Mahakashapa," and he said, "Don't criticize me anymore. And so you criticize me before, so please don't accuse me anymore." The Mahakashapa stroked Ananda's head and said, "The reason why I acted so is that I thought you should achieve the result. Just as you feel no antipathy for me and hold no grudge against me, I'm the same for you. I don't have any antipathy or grudge against you." It's just like when now you have developed realization. It's just like when you draw with your arm in space, there's nothing to stop it or to get it for stuck. And in the same way, the mind of an arhat now has no attachment or clinging to any phenomena. So now you can return to where you were staying before. It's basically saying it's okay for you to come back. Now, at that point, there is the text called the Faiyun Qulin, or you could probably translate it as the precious grove of Dharma. Now, I mentioned this the other day. This is a Chinese text. It's a compilation of the words of Chinese masters. And here it cites a passage from the Sutra of the Bodhisattva entering the womb. And here it gives a slightly different explanation of Ananda achieving realization. And so what it says is that at that time, Mahakashapa had gathered the entire Sangha, and everyone was gathered there in the Sangha. And then Upali said, "You should lead everyone else in reciting Ananda's offenses. You got to lead everyone in reciting the offenses of Ananda in the presence of the whole Sangha." So Upali did as Mahakashapa told him to. And then in the presence of all the offenses and of not requesting the Buddha pass into nirvana and so forth. And when they did this, and Sangha was very upset. He was unhappy. He was uncomfortable. He felt very uncomfortable. It hasn't been long since the Buddha passed away. But now I'm getting so embarrassed, and they're giving me such a hard time. What's going on? And when he began to think like that, and why is staying right there? He began to contemplate the Four Noble Truths. He started to ponder them. And as he thought about the Four Noble Truths, then right there, in the middle of the entire gathering of the Sangha, while they're reciting all of his offenses, so in that environment, he achieved Arhatship. He achieved Arhatship and was freed from all stains. And so in that short time, he achieved Arhatship. Such a short time. And so all the Arhats who were gathered around him then praised him. And also the gods sang a song in praise of him from the sky. And also the great earth quaked in 6 ways. And so this is a passage, what it says in a passage from the Sutra of the Bodhisattva entering the womb that is cited in the precious grove of Dharma. So now next, we're at the point of speaking about Ananda reciting the sutras. So Ananda achieved the result, and so once he'd achieved the result, then after that, the Sangha had a discussion. He'd achieved the result. This is after Mahakashapa said, "You may return." And so the Sangha had a discussion. They said, "Well, Gavampati, we invited him, but he passed into nirvana. So who else can compile the sutras? Who can do it? And when they were speaking about discussing who could compile the sutras, they said, well, Elder Anuruddha said, well, Elder Ananda would be able to compile the sutras. So among all the Buddha's students, it was he who was always with the Buddha and serving him. And, as soon as the Buddha would say something, he'd remember it and not forget it. And also the Buddha also praised him very highly. So if we invite Ananda, then he can compile the sutras. Then Mahagashra once again rubbed Ananda in his head. So before he was like really accusing him, and now today he's being really nice to him and rubbed his head and say, in the past, the Buddha told you to remember all the sutras. So now it's time for you to repay the Buddha's kindness. So what was the place where the Buddha first taught the Dharma? And so now the Buddha's great disciples who were able to read the sutras have passed into nirvana, and only you are left. And so today, in accord with the Buddha's intentions and out of love for sentient beings, you must compile and recite the sutras. And so at that time, then Ananda prostrated at the Sangha and sat on the lion throne and began to recite or compile the sutras. Now, what it says here in the Mulasarvastivada Finer Points of Discipline is that they made a lion throne, a great lion throne for Ananda. So that are their 500 arhats. They spread all of their Sangati outer robes on the lion throne, and then Ananda sat on that throne. Now, before Ananda sat on the throne, then he looked in all four directions. So he looked in the east, west, north, and south, and in all the Karandas. And first he looked at all sentient beings with compassion, looking in the fourth, and he meditated on compassion. And after he meditated in compassion, then he felt this intention to encourage everyone to practice the Dharma. And with great politeness and respect for all the elder arhats, he first circumambulated the throne to the right, he prostrated to the throne, and then he prostrated to those with more seniority. And then after this, he kept in mind the conception of impermanence, and he sat on the throne. And so now it was time for Ananda to show him off. So he had really a hard time before. Everyone was accusing him, saying, this wasn't right, that wasn't right. And now it's time for him to show off. So then he sat there. So now, for that reason, in the Kadampa tradition, when you go to make an offering to there's this tradition of, before you sit on a throne, of prostrating to it. And they say that this is a tradition of Ananda and the other arhats. So this is to showing the greatness of the Dharma, because normally you're not allowed to sit on a high throne. But when you're teaching the Dharma, then you sit on a high throne. And when you sit on a throne, it's not okay to think, oh, I'm really something, and sit on that. You have to think of yourself as teaching the Dharma. And if you don't separate the Dharma, the true Dharma, from yourself, because it's in, and so because the Dharma is within the symptoms, and so when the person sits on the throne, then it's like the greatness of the Dharma. So it's the Dharma that's on the throne. So when you sit on a throne, it's not a sign that you have a high rank or a high status. Likewise, when you sit on the throne, remember the words from, remember the verse that says, like candles and stars and light forms like clouds and so forth. And then you meditate, view all impermanence phenomena as impermanent. And then you're thinking about the Dharma, remembering impermanence, then you sit on the throne. So this is the tradition of the arhats of the past. And this is another important thing for us to know. Now, at that point, Mahakashapa, after Ananda had sat on there, then Mahakashapa recited some verses. Now, if I translate these roughly, then the Buddha is like the king of lions and Ananda is his son. Now the Buddha is sitting on the lion throne, but the Buddha is not here. And because the Buddha is not present, even though there are many arhats who are gathered here, there's no splendor. They don't have as much splendor as they do when the Buddha is there. For example, if you have a moonless night, then many stars may be beautiful, but it's not as light as when the moon is shining. So it's proper for you, the student, to teach the words of him with great prajna. So now you should explain where the Buddha first taught the Dharma. And so this is what Mahakashapa said. Now what it says, Nafayu Chuling, the precious grove of Dharma, the Chinese text that I mentioned before, this gives another quotation from the Sutra of the Bodhisattva entering the womb to describe the way that Anattatattam. So this is a different different description. So I thought I'd share it with you too. So what it says there is, Mahakashapa had Ananda sit on a high throne made of the 7 precious substances. And once he had sat, then what Mahakashapa said to Ananda was, recite the Dharma taught by the Buddha without emitting even a single word or single letter. Compile the basket or the texts of the Bodhisattvas in one session. Compile the texts of the Shravakas into another section. Compile the points of the Vinaya into another section. So at that time, first Buddha recited the sutras, and he was reciting the sutras. And first there was he started the sutra of the entering the sutra, then the sutra of the Bardo, then there's a sutra of the great equality, then there's a basket of the Vinaya, then the basket of the Bodhisattvas on the 10 levels, then the various sutras, then there's and then the Shakyas and so forth. So he recited all of the sutras. And at that time, when Ananda was reciting the Sumedha, he would say, thus did I hear at one time. He was saying, I heard this at one point. So thus did I hear. It said, I heard this in the past. So at one time, the Buddha was at this certain place. And so that's how he began when he recited the sutras. And when he said this, then at first, he said, thus did I hear. And the Buddha at one time was in such and such a place. And as Ananda said this, Mahakashapa and the other arhats felt this, had a really strong feeling. Their faces changed and they shed tears. They had a really strong feeling. And the strong feeling that they had was the nature of people is to age and to die. They are like illusions and mirages. It's like really evident to them. In earlier times, they would be able to see the Buddha and hear the Buddha speak the Dharma, but now, not all was left of it is, thus have I heard. Now you can only say the Buddha said this. They would no longer be able to see the Buddha. They'd no longer be able to hear the Buddha. And this is impermanence. They had this really strong feeling of this. Now, there's also a Chinese text called, it's called The Complete Chronicle of the Buddha and the Patriarchs. And what it says here, it describes it a little bit differently again, because at that time, as Ananda was teaching the Dharma, then Ananda had his own appearance, right? His physical appearance. He was actually he looked a lot like the Buddha. Now, Ananda was actually only 3 finger widths, or 3 inches shorter than the Buddha. The Buddha was 3 inches taller than Ananda, but Ananda was only 3 inches smaller. But otherwise, he looked a lot like the Buddha. And when Ananda sat to teach the Dharma and sat on the throne to teach the Dharma for the first time, everyone in the area where he's teaching, then they had like 3 different confusions that had it. There are three things that they felt like confused about. The three confusions are some people felt like our teacher, the Buddha, has come back again. When he's teaching the Dharma, it's like the Buddha must have come here, they think. That's how they felt. Now, some others felt in their mind like some other Buddha had come from some other realm and was teaching them the Dharma. And so I had that feeling or that type of a confusion. And some people had the feeling that Ananda had reached Buddhahood. The way he's teaching is exactly like the way the Buddha taught. That's the feeling they had. But anyways, they had these three delusions or confusions. And anyways, when Ananda was saying, only when Ananda said, "Thus have I heard," that those delusions were quelled. Oh, it's Ananda who's saying that. You're saying the things that the Buddha had said before, and only then were the delusions able to be dispelled. Before that, they all had a feeling that it was the Buddha who had returned, or that a Buddha had come from another realm, or that Ananda had reached Buddhahood. Now, at that time, when Ananda was reciting the sutras, when he began, he'd say, "Thus have I heard," as he said. They would say, when the Buddha first turned the wheel of Dharma, when he first turned the wheel of Dharma in the land of Varanasi, he wasn't actually there. He wasn't present when the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma. But I heard this from other people, he said. "Thus have I heard," he said. That means I heard it from other people. Now, it also says on the chronicles of the complete chronicle of the Buddha and the patriarchs, and what it says is that in earlier accounts, it is said that Ananda had achieved the samadhi of the Buddha's wisdom. He was able to hear all Dharma himself. And so whenever he heard the Buddha teach the Dharma, he had the samadhi, because the power of samadhi, he could actually hear any of the Dharma that the Buddha had taught. Like these days, if you go to a website, if you want to listen to a song, you can type it in a search and Google it, and then immediately the song shows up, right? And something because the Buddha had the samadhi, the Buddha's wisdom, whatever Dharma he wanted to hear, he could just imagine and just enter that samadhi and could hear it. So that's what it says. And if it's not like that, then in our Buddhism, we talk about the words transmitted by blessings, right? For example, in the Heart Sutra, because of the power, the blessing the Buddha, because of the power of the Buddha being in samadhi, that Avalokiteshvara was blessed and able to teach the Heart Sutra. So it's similar like this, that in that sutra, by the blessings of the Buddha, Avalokiteshvara was able to teach the sutra to Shariputra. So this is how it is described in this other Chinese text. In any case, to return to the account from the great commentary in the 100,000, what it says is that first Ananda joined his palms in the direction of the place where the Buddha passed into nirvana. So there's the place where the Buddha passed into nirvana, and so before he taught the Dharma, then Ananda then prostrated there, and he spoke some verses. And if we translate these verses, the basic meaning of it is, when the Buddha first turned the wheel of Dharma, I wasn't present, but I heard what was passed down from one person to another. And so I've heard that the Buddha first opened the gateway to the Nectar-Light Dharma in Varanasi, to the good group of five. He taught the Dharma, the Four Noble Truths, suffering, origin, cessation, and the path. And at that time, the all-knowing Kaundinya and so forth, who were the first individuals to manifest the path. And at the same time, there were 80,000 gods who achieved a result. And at that time, there were 1,000 arhats, as it says. All those 1,000 arhats, as soon as they heard Ananda speak, they levitated into the sky, the height of 7 palm trees. They levitated up to the height of 7 palm trees, and then they all said, "Oh, impermanence is really powerful." In the past, we would meet the Buddha and listen to the Dharma from him, but now all we have left is "Thus have I heard." We don't have anything left. So they said a few verses. And then Aniruddha recited a few stanzas, and Mahakashyapa recited a few stanzas, but I haven't translated them because I thought there's no particular reason to explain them. And then after that, Mahakashyapa said to Ananda, Ananda spoke to Ananda about how they should compile all of the sutras that Ananda had recited and compile them into different sections. Because all the sutras from the Sutra of the Wheel of Dharma to the Sutra of the Great Parinirvana, these all need to combine into the 4 agamas. So these are the numerical discourses, the middle-length discourses, the long discourses, and the connected discourses. In case all of these sutras of the Buddha need to be combined in these 4 collections of discourses. And these need to be given the common name of the basket or pitaka of the sutras. So in case, first Ananda recited each of the sutras in turn, then after he had recited them, Mahakashyapa said that spoke about how they need to be compiled into 4 different collections. So one of them was called, those long ones are included in the long discourses. The middle-length ones were put in a collection called the middle-length discourses. And the overall name would be the basket of the sutras. And so this is how the recitation or compilation of the sutras was done. Then after that, there's the compilation of the Vinaya. And so I will speak about that in a few days. And so that the person who recited that was Upali. And so I will need to give you an account of the life of Upali. So then I will explain to you the explanation of how I recited the Upali and how it was all compiled, and then I will speak about the assertions of different contemporary scholars about how they view the First Council. And saying that, we'll basically finish our teaching for this year.